What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2023-2024 NBA team look ahead. We're on to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I am super excited and grateful to be joined by Kyle Teige. He covers the Minnesota Timberwolves for Score North, as well as the Dane Moore NBA podcast, one of my favorite team-specific podcasts in the business. Those who do a great job over there. Follow Kyle on Twitter at KYLETHEIGE. And then you can follow the Dane Moore and the NBA podcast that they both do at Dane Moore NBA. I'll include the links to everything that Kyle does in the YouTube and podcast description. Kyle, it's your first time on here, so thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk Wolves with me.
I was really hyped when you hit me up on Twitter, so this is kind of a big moment for me as well. I appreciate you and all the stuff you do. Like I said before we started recording, I think you might have the best setup background in the podcast game. So if you're on YouTube, it's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the Wolves. It's not scary anymore to be a fan of the team, with some questions still, but things are looking up.
Well, one, thank you for the kind words, and it's better. The YouTube commenters think I'm in like a closet for some reason, and I used to podcast from an attic, so I thought that gave up more closet vibes than my actual office. Yeah, this team is. Look, I can't quit the Wolves. My co-host and I were so high on the Rudy Gobert stuff last summer, and we obviously, pull back on that a little bit, but we both remain fascinated with this team and also fairly high on them. But I wanted to start because with this team, I think it matters what happened last season or didn't happen. How much do we read in to how last season unfolded, given all the injuries they dealt with, and then, of course, the roster churn at the trade deadline?
So it's a good question. I mean, obviously, a little over a year ago, they make this blockbuster trade where, Timberwolves fans and people who cover the team aren't used to blockbuster trades where good players come our way. It's usually the other way around. And then you were immediately met with high expectations, which is not something a franchise that's 34 years in, has like one noteworthy playoff run in them is used to. So expectations, and then obviously Karl's injury, I think it was November, he really shreds up his calf. We thought it was an Achilles in the moment, but he missed his 52 games. So last year was all about this two bigs experiment, right? Like you're talking about all other 29 teams, but I think you're starting to see a vibe or a trend in the league again that we were so used to small ball. I think more and more teams are getting a little bigger now. I mean, Denver had a pretty big front line last year when they won the title. So you have this experiment and then you get it nuked right away when Karl's out. So they still were able to use depth. They had the deepest team in franchise history last year. Again, if you don't know the Timberwolves, that's a pretty low bar because there was a lot of Luke Ridnours and Alexei Shveds in our fandom. But this year's team is even deeper, and now I think with a full training camp, healthy guys, knock on wood, that we're going to be able to get a real good image. But last year, it looked really good with Naz Reid at the 4 and Kyle Anderson at the 4 and Rudy patrolling the paint. But that's not what this was about. That's not what the experiment is about. This has to work with Karl and Rudy this season. Otherwise, next summer, as you get into second apron and the new CBA, they could be on the precipice of another blockbuster trades where maybe good players are going out. So not a ton to take from last year. I think we're still going to learn a lot about this team in October, November, and December. But injuries definitely kind of derailed a lot of the excitement of last year.
This is so random, but you say Alexei Shved, and I can't hear that name, and I always just think of Ricky Rubio's Change Your Face, Enjoy It. That's what I immediately go to, for anyone who cares. So, yeah, this team, the stuff that they're saying leading into this season, one of the takeaways seems like they're trying to run with a more structured offense and with play calls, which I find interesting. How do you think they benefit from that? What changes do you actually see implemented? How does that impact Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards specifically, who might be their two most important offensive players?
Yeah, we're using the word, how Jay Billis in draft coverage uses wingspan and then everyone drinks? That's kind of what we do with structure in Wolves Twitter is anytime we bring up the word structure, it's oh my God, again. But I don't think structure is a bad thing, right? If anyone listening to this in any job you have or your family or whatever, structure is nice because then you can build off structure. Structure shouldn't restrict you. It should allow you to then have a baseline that then you can, freestyle off of or build off of. So for the Wolves, especially with a guy like Rudy, he's not the best player on the team. That's Karl-Anthony. He's not the second best. That's Karl-Anthony. He's probably not the third. That's Jaden McDaniels. But he is such an integral part, and you paid so much to get him. I mean, that dude is sign tangent, he loves his vitamins and his supplements and his workout routine. He loves structure. He's a regiment guy. And when he's the core of your defense and kind of the rim protector and all that stuff, you need him to be able to trust and have a structure that then Jaden and Ant can kind of freestyle off of both offensively and defensively. So I just think Finch, this is the first time Finch has been here where he hasn't had D'Angelo Russell at point guard. That's no knock to D'Lo. I think D'Lo is more of a free-flowing ball in his hands type guy. Now it's Mike Conley. I think the ball is going to move around more. They played the Knicks over the weekend in a preseason game, and in the second half had 25 assists on 25 made baskets. That's kind of the Finchian, Golden State move the ball type thing. So I think he wants to install more structure. You saw Ant do really well with Team USA structure, but then still allow those guys. In transition is when Ant's going to thrive. Allow Karl to be a little more creative. He's a good passing big. So I think structure is going to be something they stress in training camp, and you'll see early on in the season. But I don't think that means they're going to be robotic or rigid in how they play.
Yeah, among the things I missed on with the Timberwolves last season was thinking that the Mike Conley trade was a mistake because I thought D'Angelo Russell had a very good individual season, but 3 games into the Mike Conley experience, I'm like, oh, is it Mike Conley just hitting those corners? He hits a corner 3, like everything just seems to be working. How important is he to kind of optimizing this offensive everybody drink structure?
If you are not a Timberwolves fan, but you're just familiar with buzzwords like Rudy Gobert trade or Tim Connolly, you know that they paid, 1.5, 2 times market value last summer to get their house, and their house was Rudy Gobert. And that will never be able to fully get the compensation back for that. It was an overpay. They got a good player. But I say all that to say the Mike Conley trade was like if you found a really nice yacht and someone just had to sell it right away and they were going to give it to you for 1/10 of the price. Because Mike Conley's great. He feels rejuvenated. He's been great in media day. He says he feels like he's 25. He's also probably in the lineage of all the cool point guards Anthony Edwards has played with. Ricky Rubio, Patrick Beverley, D'Angelo Russell, they've all helped mentor him. Mike might be the best. That guy's never gotten a technical foul in his career. But I want to go back to the Conley trade quick because, yes, it was Mike Conley. But another guy who has looked really good for Team Canada in the summer, in the workouts, is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They flipped D'Lo for 2 point guards / just guards that fit better. And if you remember that trade with the Lakers and the Jazz, they got 3 second-round picks. They used one of those second-round picks to move up and get a guy who we're all crushing on right now, is 19-year-old Leonard Miller, who looked phenomenal. Again, just preseason, but looks like another kind of young, cheap second-round guy that Tim Conley found. So to your original question, I just think Mike Conley, when he came in, Chris Finch told him exactly, like, I need you to score. You haven't been expected to score in Utah. You've been more of a facilitator. Like, you need to fill some of D'Lo's shoes and score and space the floor and be aggressive with your own shot. And I just think we like to do leadership power rankings and kind of figure that stuff out. I think Mike Conley's probably the leader of this team. He's not the loudest, but everyone in that room listens to him and believes in him. And I think he's going to be, Finch called him the quarterback on the court. So I think Finch is going to trust him to promote that structure, but also be like, hey, if I have to audible, I trust you to audible with certain situations.
Rudy Gobert had a down year last season, probably at both ends of the floor. Having Mike Conley here, I would assume he ended up with his lowest roll man volume last year, I believe. And having Mike Conley there, Anthony Edwards improving, I would think that changes. But he's also talked a lot about improving his, for lack of just ball skills, better phrasing. I find myself intrigued and terrified by that because I don't necessarily want him trying certain things that comes with. But do you buy into the fact that he can do that? Maybe make more decisions with the ball to where it's, hey, this is someone outside of a dunk. I think he shot 47% on non-dunks last year. And if he's just able to either even use a gather dribble or finish better on layups, that's something that goes a long way for this team. Do you buy into that type of improvement being there? Or is this this guy's in his 30s. What are we really waiting for?
I will say a little behind the scenes of the podcasting world. When you sent me these questions, I just started reading number 4. Do you buy into Rudy Gobert? And I just answered it no. I didn't even need to read the rest of it. No, one thing that, and this is, I'm very pro Chris Finch, as you can tell. But last year when they got Rudy, one of the things was they were going to unlock this untapped offensive potential. And it was borderline throw it into him in the post and go full Hakeem. And he does not have those skills. This is probably a more nuanced conversation of, can old dogs learn new tricks? I don't know. This summer was viral for Rudy taking a couple threes for France. I don't think he'll ever take a 3 for the team. I think that would be a nightmare. But basically little things, right? Can you get him one thing we're pushing over in our Wolves fandom and coverage is like a push shot. Like if he gets the ball and he's not, he is a freak of nature in terms of his height and his build, but he's not necessarily like a leaper. He's not the most.
Right.
He does a lot of things. If you watch him around the rim, that are like finger rolls. It's like, hey man, just dunk it. So that kind of 5 foot space where maybe he can't gather and dunk. Maybe there's a little push shot involved, but I think maybe just refining or leaning into the things that worked for him in his 20s in Utah would be good. But asking him to do other stuff. And maybe it was just a short sample size, but it did not look good last year, and it really kind of nuked how their offense was looking. So it's weird for non-Timberwolves fans to be like, wait, you paid all those picks and all those players to get a guy who you want to be a role player, but that's really all they want. They just want him to be the best role player that can be. If he scores 8 points on a Tuesday, that's cool because he probably got 14 rebounds and had 4 blocks and had a bunch of screen assists. But I don't know if there's much left to tap into when it comes to Rudy's offense.
I might be okay with him posting up Derek Lively, but that's really like the extent of where it'd be.
Yeah. Oh my God. Don't even get me started. I don't want to critique any Dallas Mavericks player or fan, but boy, did those 2 games made me feel good as a Timberwolves fan and bad as someone who would watch the Mavericks.
What does this team need from, and I didn't include this in the outline, but what do they need from Rudy Gobert defensively? I think a lot of people were disappointed that he just wasn't kind of like the caps lock generational defender. I think that happens when you get older. I also think like he still had his high moments, and there were points where it probably got better as the season wore on. Like, what are realistic expectations for him on that end of the floor?
I think just navigating what coverages. I mean, they kind of, since Finch got here, they've kind of dabbled with multiple defensive coverages. I mean, they can run out lineups, man, where they can just switch 1 through 5. But that's not really why you get Rudy Gobert, right? You want him around the rim. He's still, I'm still learning some of the more advanced stats that come up now with how Rudy is still very, very highly rated as like just rim deterrence. And he does change shots. And he's not Walker Kessler. Again, that ship has kind of already sailed, but he's still really, really damn good at it. So I think just asking him, making him feel more comfortable. He's also, in his defense, because of the injuries last year, he didn't have a lot of trust. I don't think his teammates trusted him because they didn't know him, and he is just a more unique guy. And I don't think he trusted his player or his teammates as well. But in Utah, did he ever really have, and no knock on Utah when they were making runs, but did he ever have a player as good on the perimeter defensively as Jaden McDaniels? I don't know. Now he knows who Jaden is. Now he knows what Ant's defensive ceiling is. So I think if he can trust the guys on the perimeter more and just, really just set up shop defensively around the rim, this team still struggles to rebound. That's another reason they got him, is that if he can just gobble up 14, 15 rebounds a night, get a couple blocks, and just deter some shots, yeah, you're paying a real premium for that mortgage, but that's all they need. They just need somewhere to live, and him giving you 8, 15, and 3 every night is a dream come true for this organization.
Yeah, especially they're so big, and yet their rebounding was just
crazy. It's crazy.
I'm asking this, I think, more so for me because I don't know that actual basketball fans will be interested, but there's been like a pattern. It was out there on Wolves social media that Karl-Anthony Towns has been very like short with the media. And I was listening to a podcast you and Dane did where you played the clip of someone asking him about it. And his answer about why he was being short was so unbelievably short. Is there like, what is this thing? Is it just supposed to reflect a mindset? Is it something to even note? Does it not matter?
I think it matters because it's clearly strategic and he's leaning into it. I've always been more pro Cat than maybe your general person. I know that like the resume is not there, but again, as a Minnesota sports fan, you're used to players coming through and then wanting to leave. He's been very adamant about wanting to make it work. It's again, if you're a Celtics fan listening to this or a Lakers fan, you're like, this kid's crazy. And admittedly so, but like, it's cool that Karl wants to wear like a Spreewell jersey to practice or like wear the retro shorts. He embraces wanting to try to make this work. And then I do think he's gotten to a level because he said some dumb things, like some of the podcasts he was on this summer, not great. But they're always innocent. They're just stupid, right? It's not like there's other players in the news right now that are causing a lot more havoc off the court than what Karl does. But I think he was just burned by the reaction to so many lighthearted things like, our play-in game victory was just as important or meaningful as the Denver. It's like, no, it wasn't. That's not true. But now he's just really trying to be short, zero dark Karl, I guess. And that's good because he's still a really good basketball player. And this team does not need any more sound bites because Ant will give them all to you. They got some young guys that like to talk as well. So if that's his mentality, he's just going to be basketball, basketball, basketball. It's going to come off a little weird, and we'll critique him again. But I think that's the best thing for him and this team is just, hey, maybe you're not the guy that talks after games. Let Ant do that. Let some of these other, like Mike Conley's a great quote. Kyle Anderson's phenomenal. So if we see less or hear less of Karl, that's probably a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way where, I mean, I dunk on what players and executives and people say all the time. And it's like, if you don't want to have to deal with the blowback of I said this and it's in the moment and like you have this huge platform, I didn't even think of it that way. And so that just doesn't seem like that big of an issue at all. Just, it was definitely a change. And so I was so very curious. So the question, the surface level question is, can Karl-Anthony Towns play the 4? But what is that? Like, what do we actually need to be watching most closely from him if this dual big setup, not just with Rudy Gobert, but they're going to play Naz Reid a ton of minutes as well, if it's going to work? Like, what should we be watching to see from Karl-Anthony Towns?
Well, that's like one of the better ways anyone's ever phrased that is, can he play the 4? My pushback would be, and again, I'm very pro Karl-Anthony Towns, is like, can he play the 5? Right? Like, that team has never really shown a level of success. Now, granted, they had some lean rosters, but the rebounding he's just not a great rebounder. He's not as athletic as some of the other typical centers you would think. I mean, he can shoot the ball, maybe the best in the league as a big man, but like, he's not Brook Lopez's size. He doesn't have that rim protection. So I think him playing the 4, a lot of it's going to come down to how do teams hunt him on the perimeter because he's just going to be out there more. Can he move his feet enough? But then just in general, going back to the crazy comments thing, like, I don't know if he's the best shooting big man of all time because Dirk was pretty good, but he is really good. And for him, he just needs to up his 3-point attempts. Like, that's like the basic. Like, if you want like a real basketball for dummies, it's like, hey, Karl, take 8 threes a game. I don't care what else you do. Just like take threes. Like you saw him in the Dominican Republic, just cross half court, one step, get the ball, let it fly. That's unguardable. And then he has developed Giannis-esque, not on Giannis's level, but like the ability to pump and go and get to the rim. So I think him playing power forward will be more about what he does on offense and can he space the floor and give guys like Ant more room to create because Rudy is, taking up some real estate around the rim. Defensively, I think he can be a liability, and it's okay because you have Rudy Gobert, who is a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, Jaden McDaniels, and Ant. And at other times, too, you'll kind of weave in guys that can also defend. Mike Conley's not a sieve. So I think if he can keep it up on the offensive end, we won't worry as much about what he's not bringing to you as a great typical defensive-minded power forward on the defensive end.
Do you think they have enough spacing outside the starting 5 to optimize or lean on his pump and go game?
I spend a lot of nights just sitting on my couch thinking about that. I don't know. I do think shooting is like I'm a little nervous about that, but I also will say that their 2 biggest, they obviously re-signed Naz Reid right before free agency. Would love to tell you my thoughts on him at some point, but they also then went out right away and got Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. I wasn't super familiar with Troy Brown Jr. just because I remember he started for the Lakers for a while and then kind of got buried after the trade, but he played last night in a really weak preseason game, but he was awesome. Like, he just hit every 3 he took. Shake Milton can just cook too as well. So I do think when their bench is going to be like their 5 or their 6 through 9 guys are going to be like a combination of Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who has refined his shot mechanics and is at least respectable, and then Kyle Anderson, who I know it takes a week for the shot to get off, but I think he shot damn near 40% last year from 3. So I'm putting a pin in it, but I do think they have enough spacing. And then Mike Conley has been great shooting almost career highs from deep. So I do think when they start to get into weird rotations, they'll have enough that gives Karl enough space. And hell, as much as I've just emphasized this experiment, it might be Karl and Rudy just playing different times and Karl's with Naz more. Naz had 4 threes in the first half against the Knicks. Like, I do think there's enough spacing. It's just does Chris Finch put the right 5-man rotations out there to make sure Karl does have that space.
You want to talk about Naz Reid? This podcast loves some Naz Reid. He took off before his injury last year. What impressed you the most about his development? And then what are you kind of monitoring most closely as he heads into this year?
I love this pod, so everyone should be subscribing because I think Dan has one of the best pods out there. But I don't know the typical listener how familiar they are with Naz Reid. So I do want to just give the elevator pitch. Naz Reid was undrafted out of LSU, and he would tell you this more than anyone. He was a fat kid who couldn't jump. Like I always say, you think about guys jumping from the free throw line. Naz Reid couldn't jump over it, and it's painted on the floor. He had no athleticism. He is the best developmental story in franchise history. I think he's also one of the best developmental stories just in the league. He's an undrafted guy who has just busted his ass every year and now gotten paid. He's also like only 24 years old. So he still is like, is he a 5? Is he a 4? I don't know, but he's great on the bounce. He has a point guard's handle because he was one of those prospects that like, oh, I played guard, and then all of a sudden one summer I grew 6 inches and now I'm a big guy. He's the Wolves executives, everyone coaches will tell you he's the most competitive player on the team. He took losing the hardest those first couple of years. So we were all happy to see him re-signed, happy to see him get paid. And it was 3 games, Dan, but there was a West Coast road trip about in February where they had all their guys. Karl came back, and they looked awesome. And it was all because in those 3 games of like what Naz Reid just allowed them to do with Karl and Naz, Rudy and Naz at the 5 with Kyle at the 4. So I think he is still, when we do the whole, oh, this is the under 25 group and this is what each team has for the future, like it's always Ant and Jaden. Naz Reid's in there. He's a core part of this team. He's signed as a core part of this team. And I just think he continues to get better at everything, including defense, including rebounding. So his story is awesome. If you want a guy to cheer for, it's him. And that was just, I appreciate you letting me have propaganda for Naz Reid for a little bit, because he's one of the coolest guys in the league. And I think more and more fans on a national level will get to know him this summer or this fall.
Yeah, and look, last season he sneakily shot 37% on non-corner threes, which is just big as the position that he's going to play. Yep. And the thing that absolutely floored me was his floor game. Was just like it was. This guy's taking people off the dribble. And it's not just an open space. Like no, he's going through traffic, making these tough, gritty finishes. There's that 16-game stretch, I think, right before his injury, where he was just annihilating everybody. And you mentioned his defense improved, like his stand-up rim protection had improved. He is. When you start digging into, and I like the data of the dual big combinations from last season, I'm so optimistic on basically any pairing that includes him, even though the numbers don't always support that. And a lot of it could be, well, D'Lo was there and Mike Conley wasn't. So we're working with such a limited sample size. But when you're looking at these, dual big combinations, what are the, what's the one that intrigues you the most? And then what's the one that are you concerned about the most, where you're looking at Rudy and Naz or Cat and Naz, or then there's Rudy and Cat as well. It's just, every single combination is so fascinating and has still so many unanswered questions because of, for the most part, the limited sample that we got from them.
Well, if you go pull up like the 2-man lineup data from last year, the Naz and Rudy pairing was really bad. Like, I don't know, like a negative 17 net rating or something. So that would be the one that's most concerning. And ironically, I think that's the one I'm most excited for, because I just think Naz Reid's ability to space the floor, sometimes it gets out of control. Like he'll get the rebound and just be like, hey, I'm going to play point guard this possession. I'm going to sprint up the floor. It's like, hey man, like classic pickup basketball, give it to a guard. But he's just fearless in that way. And I think him playing alongside Rudy, he had a couple possessions against the Mavericks where like he would just attack the closeout and then just have a really nice little drop down pass or a lob to Rudy. So he's kind of like a backup Kyle Anderson in the way that I think Naz can unlock a lot of guys. I also just think too, Naz and Kyle are really fun. Kyle Anderson is like we say this a lot in sports, but like the prototypical 5-tool guy. He's a Swiss Army knife. He can just make everyone's life easier. His role might be diminished this season just because he played a lot of 4 when Karl was out. But yeah, I think Naz, no matter what the stats were last year, and they're real stats, but I think that data can be thrown out a little bit because I think he's just continued to add things to his game that like, okay, now let's see him just, be the guy that gets Rudy touches around the rim when Naz is closing out, because he's kind of driving like Karl would. So yeah, there's some scary numbers for sure on Naz, and the defense was probably one of the worst things he did early in the season, but he's retooled his body, all the stuff I said earlier. So I'm basically, if Naz Reid's on the floor, I'm tuning in. I don't care who the other 4 guys are.
I think I might be most intrigued by the Cat Naz pairing, in part because I believe in Naz's defense. And when you're looking at what he's able to do on offense, that's your pathway to playing 5 out without maybe torpedoing your defensive structure. Everybody drink again. How many times am I going to say that word? So I think I'm most excited to see that one. But do you think this team is telegraphed by re-signing Naz Reid that we're just going to play with 2 bigs for basically all 48 minutes? Or do you think they'll get to a point where they still want to stagger in some ways and see some of the 1 big combinations, and what maybe is the one that they'll be leaning upon most?
I think that's a great question. I might steal that for future pods. I don't know, because that's kind of the thing we're doing now. We don't have much basketball to talk about, so we start hammering rotations. They just pay way too much money to way too many big guys for it ever to be 1 big out there. I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be cool to see like a Rudy Gobert at the 5, Kyle at the 4, and then 3 guards. But you would then have like $55 million on the bench in Karl and Naz. So it's going to be really difficult. I did say at the top that last year was the deepest team in franchise history. Without a doubt, this team is deeper. And now the deepest team in franchise history. I mean, like last year, not to segue, but like Jalen Noel was 6th in total minutes for this team last year, and Austin Rivers was 7th or 8th. Both those guys are like pseudo out of the league right now. I think Jalen Noel's on a training camp deal with the Kings, and Austin Rivers doesn't have a job. Now you just replace those guys with like Shake Milton, who you know is good, or now you just replace those guys with like more minutes for Karl. So I think rotations will be something that if we drink to structure, we also maybe drink something harder for rotations, because Finch has more ingredients in the kitchen than most coaches have and than Finch has ever had. But can he, I mean, not to be silly, but like, can he cook? Like, does he know how to pair those ingredients together to make good meals? Because he could also make some really, lame 5-man lineups, and then it could kill them early on in the season.
You had mentioned Kyle Anderson before and his role shrinking. How much do we brace for his role to shrink? He was so important last year. You've actually called him the most important signing, free agent signing in Wolves history. Is it, I think you look at it, you said he played a lot of 4, and it's just like, well, those minutes aren't going to be there. But then it's, okay, well, this team doesn't really have traditional point guards, especially when you get outside the starting lineup. So could they just try to run ultra big where maybe he's the pseudo primary playmaker if they ever want to get away with Mike Conley and Ant on the bench, or even when Mike Conley is just on the bench?
Yeah, I mean, for any comic book nerds that like Avengers, like this is Doctor Strange is like one, like there is one simulation of all this that this team like wins 50 games and everything clicks back to the ingredients thing. But there's also so many that don't. So like, yeah, can Kyle be the backup point guard, but also like the 3rd string power forward, and also like backup Jaden at the 3? The numbers don't love Kyle Anderson at the 3, especially on this team, as much as they liked him at the 4. In an ideal world, Kyle's role wouldn't diminish, but again, you're getting 52 extra games of Karl. He's going to start. They might have the least flexible starting 5 in the league just from politics. Like, you're never going to be able to change their starting 5 unless you beg Minnesota Mike Conley to like come off the bench. So I don't know. I've kind of predicted too, like it's a contract year for Kyle. He's so important to them. Finch loves him, but if he's in a contract year and he is getting diminished role and stuff, like, is he a guy you maybe dangle at the deadline when you try to, improve in another area like the shooting that I'm concerned about? I don't want Kyle Anderson to leave, but he might be the most available guy on the roster just because of how this is all working out financially. So, yeah, I think he can play backup point guard, but I think Shake Milton can too. I think Nickeil is a really nice backup to Mike. He can play the 3 behind Jaden in spots, but I think Troy Brown Jr. is just a better shooter to space the floor. He can back up the 4 for sure, but again, like you just gave Naz Reid $52 million. So that might be the toughest thing for Finch this year, is how do I find enough minutes for Kyle? Can he still get to 20 minutes? And is he going to be okay with a diminished role because he came in? And I know people might think I'm a homer, but again, when I say he's the best free agent signing in franchise history, go look at the list. There's not a lot of other impactful players on that list. So, I think Kyle Anderson to me is maybe the biggest burning question outside of can the 2 bigs work?
Is there might be room to play larger when it's Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor together? That might be a lineup where you could shoehorn some Kyle Anderson minutes if that's like the front court, if you want him as your backup point guard, maybe.
I think like I've been coining the term size matters for this team, put it on a shirt of like, if you just played Kyle, Ant, Jaden, Karl, or Naz, and Rudy, like that's probably one of the longest all 6'8" or higher 5-man lineups in the league. I think that'd be awesome. And again, Tim Connolly has spoke about this. Chris Finch has been pretty open about it too. Like, when you make the trade for Rudy Gobert and then you sign Naz Reid to 352, like, you're big. Like, don't, like, it's like on Superbad when he's like, Jules, you're drunk. Like, Wolves, you're big. Like, embrace it. Play big. In those 2 games against the Mavs, I think they outscored them points in the paint like 110-60. Like, make that your thing. You still have great shooters from the outside, Karl and Ant and Jaden and Mike Conley, but embrace being big, and maybe that's what they'll do. Maybe Kyle will be a backup point guard off the bench, and they just lean into having size and length and wingspan, and that's kind of their model. But they do at least have an identity, and for the longest time, this team, and I think a lot of teams that struggle, right, Dan? Like, they don't really have an identity. I think the Wolves at least know now, like, yeah, they're drunk. They're big. This is what they're going to try to do.
It's been over 30 minutes, and I haven't asked about Anthony Edwards, which is either a sign of how interesting this team is or just criminal on my behalf. Let's start here. What impressed you the most about his development last year?
He, again, I am a fan of this team that also covers it, but he has a special place in our hearts, not to get too sappy, but like he comes in during what will be the weirdest draft in our lifetime, the 2020 draft, COVID. There's no March Madness. You don't get to see any of those games. There's no combine. There's no summer league. And then the first year we only get to interact with him on Zoom. And he's a young puppy. Like, he's 18-year-old kid who just wants to talk about fast food. So as much as Naz Reid is the greatest developmental story, I don't have kids. Like, it's been cool kind of pseudo-adopting Anthony Edwards. Because a lot of the stuff that came out in that pre-draft, and I know you remember this, like, does he like playing basketball? Is he a hard worker? Like, the comps on him. By the way,
I always, whenever I see that, I just automatically assume that player is destined for stardom. Whenever
I like that.
Whenever I see that critique.
I like that. No, and there was, I'm not going to name names, but there were people that comped him to like Deion Waiters and Jordan Crawford and all this stuff. And it's like, he might be one of the 10, 12, 15 best players in the league, and he's 22. So I think he's gotten better every year for all the things the Wolves have done wrong. And even during his tenure, they had, Gerson Rosas, and then he gets let go in a weird situation. Ryan Saunders, like, Finch has been here for most of it now, and I think Finch is a good coach and great for him. Very father-son-ish, almost, the relationship, where Austin Rivers has said this too, like, Finch can coach him hard, and if you can coach your best guy hard, that's usually a good thing as you trickle down the roster, and he's open to coaching. But he's gotten better every year, and the Wolves have surrounded him with a lot of vets. Back to that whole point guard thing, like, he's always had a sidekick. Ricky Rubio is like the best way to enter the league, right? And then Pat Bev gave him an edge that allowed them to get to the playoffs. D'Angelo Russell kind of taught him how to be more creative. I think D'Lo is one of the most underrated facilitators and passers in the league. And now Mike Conley's like, okay, you've done all that stuff. You've been a rookie. You've been tough like Pat Bev. You've been creative, but now you just need to be professional. And for you to be All-NBA, which is a big deal for him this year, because he's got about $50 million on the line for if he makes All-NBA, his contract just balloons up as one of those max extensions. Can you do it every night? Because we've seen him dunk on guys. We've seen him go for 50. We've seen him shut down, Luka and Kyrie in that one Mavs game like last year with him and Jaden. But to be one of the best, and this covering all the teams, like every single night. It can't just be on Christmas. Can't just be against the Grizzlies in April. It has to be like on the coldest night in January when you're playing the Pistons. Can you bring your game for all 82? And that's the next step. That's how you become a superstar, not a star, is to do it consistently. Verdict's still out, but what has he showed you that he's not up to any sort of challenge? He's a movie star. He's an Olympian. Like, he's doing everything you want from a young kid. So I believe in him, but we got to see it.
Yeah, and he's so polarizing because there are some that you mentioned the inconsistencies, but then it's like when you look at his profile and some of the things he's done defensively in the playoffs and just like for stretches in the regular season, there are so few guys that can legitimately be the best player on both ends of the floor for their team. And he has like the shape to be that guy. And it's just a question of, will he? And I think, so I'll start here. Do you buy, and a lot of the time last year, he was so central to the offense by necessity. Do you buy into him as a good enough passer to be that type of an engine? And I know that you and Dane have also talked about maybe being with Team USA and asked to be more of a facilitator might have helped him improve there even more, because I do think he came a long way as a playmaker over the past 2 years for sure.
Yeah, and that goes back to, again, like with the glass in hand, structure, drink. I think if he has more structure, and like, I mean, I think about this in my day job. Like if you're put in a situation where you don't have to think, you just have like the policies and procedures in place, the structure in place to just act, that'll help him. I don't think he's a great passer yet. I don't think he's a great facilitator. I haven't followed Devin Booker's career his whole timeline, but like it seemed like Devin Booker coming out of college was really your prototypical two guard that would score, but then was just forced to take on more and more of a playmaking role. And now Devin Booker is like one of the best. He can play point or the two. So I think that would be what Ant would want to lean into, is just you don't need to average 8 assists a game, because most of the time you should just be taking those shots. He still is a guy that's going to be high volume scorer, high volume shot attempts. But I think just even getting him to like whatever he averages for points, 26, 27 a game, if he can just average like 4 assists, I think those 4 assists will unlock not only things for his teammates, right, Dan, but like just more ability for him to go score, because it adds that threat of like, I might pass this, I might kick it out, I might throw this lob. But it's still, that is more than his defense. I think his ability to become a really scary playmaker is the biggest challenge and obstacle he faces. But if he hits that, again, we're talking like, how is he not, top 10 in the league by the time he's 23 years old?
I wonder if having Mike Conley there ends up helping him develop better chemistry with Rudy Gobert too, just as someone who's so familiar with setting that guy up. Is there any other just areas of a game that are like, oh, I'm going to be watching this? Is it maybe the finishing? Is it some of the takeoff points on his drives? Is it the percentage of the off the dribble three, the defensive consistency? Like, what's kind of the next biggest thing you're watching with him?
Well, again, for the non-Wolves fans listening to this, like, I am a homer, but I'm just a fan who does this part-time. So yes, sometimes when I complain about things like officiating, it's coming from a fan perspective. But I would like for Ant to get like a third of the whistles that James Harden gets or something. Ant loves to dish out contact to try to then gain contact, but he's also just big, right? Like, he's not, like, no offense to Trae Young, but Trae Young is so condensed that when he gets hit, like, he might slide 5 feet across the floor. If Ant gets hit, the player hitting him might fall backwards. So I think when he attacks the rim, to answer your question, like, I'd love to see him get, as much as I want Karl to shoot 8 threes a game, I mean, if Ant's shooting 10 free throws a game, I think he just loves a challenge. He's like, oh, I guess I'll just take this large step back three. It's like, if you want to score a bunch of points, is there any better way to do it than just stand at the free throw line and go shot and shot and shot? Like, get 8 free points a game by getting to the free throw line. So he hasn't always gotten a great whistle. He does yell hey a lot if you're listening to the League Pass broadcast, but just getting to the rim more often, learning how to absorb contact, not get hurt, knock on wood, but increasing his free throw attempts to me is kind of like something I'll be monitoring in box scores early on. Is like, I think to be the best players in the league and to be a volume scorer that averages 30, the Lukas, the James Hardens of the world, you just need free points. And he hasn't been great at getting free or easy baskets, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, I totally get that. Jaden McDaniels, another podcast favorite. There are some players who are transcendent defensively, but you have to watch them very closely to understand what they do. And you probably won't even ever understand what they do. And like a Draymond Green.
Yep.
Jaden McDaniels, I feel like you just watch and immediately sense how dominant he can be defensively. I forgot he didn't make the all-defense team. And I don't know if he made my list, but if I didn't put him on there, I think it's egregious, because I was going back and watching stuff of him from last season, and he was caps lock dominant on the defensive end. But he's also shown a bunch of flashes on the offensive end. And my question to you is sort of twofold. Is there room for him to branch out offensively on this team? Or are we like, should he be prepping for maybe even a usage decline, because Karl-Anthony Towns was not playing for so much of last year? So
that he is my favorite player, as much as I've promoted Naz Reid and all these guys. Like, Jaden McDaniels, I think, is the coolest story. I don't know if you ever Google this stuff. Like, you can see that like certain sites have a 2027 NBA mock draft right now. I don't know who the hell these kids are. They're freshmen in high school, but you can see that. There are mock drafts dating back to 5 years before 2020 where Jaden McDaniels was the first overall player mocked in drafts. He was a 5-star kid out of high school, goes to Washington, poor coaching, gets a lot of technical fouls, falls in the draft, gets selected like 28th in 2020, and he in 3 years has become, and again, you watch probably more national around the league than I do, but like, I think he might be the best perimeter defender in the league, if not one of the top 5. And then something that just adds to him is that feels like most perimeter guys that can defend really well are the Paul George 6'8", 6'9" wingspan. I think he's like 6'11" now.
And he also, how tall is he now?
I mean, when I was at media day and he stands next to Rudy, it's like, are they the same size? And I know Rudy's north of 7 feet. So if he's 6'11", he's also, and a lot of the advanced metrics back this up, he might be this. Rudy's still the best rim protector on the team, but Jaden is right there, number 2. So if your best perimeter defender is also just an elite rim protector, and then to go back to what you said, like, he's kind of nasty with the ball in his hands a little bit. Like, he can score, he can get to the rim. He loves the mid-range. They don't ask him to do that. And honestly, talking to coaches and stuff, like, he's about to get paid really handsomely, like Ant did. It's a tough negotiation because you don't just throw the max at him like you would a Desmond Bane or an Ant. But if you're his representation, you're like, well, why wouldn't you? Like, I'm the whole reason that the Rudy Gobert trade looks bad, because instead of, trading me in the package and keeping 2 or 3 firsts, you had to give all those extra firsts because you made me untouchable. I've been the best defender in the team. I'm not like a malcontent. Yes, he did punch a wall. Let's move forward from that.
Well,
but like,
constructed wall.
Yeah, so he's not really asking for the ball more. So I think you're going to see him just skyrocket in terms of salary. But you actually said something that Finch told us, is like, I don't think there's much more room for him to grow offensively for now, right? And again, this is going to look totally different every other year, because if you unload Karl next summer, now you have this big chunk of the pie that someone has to eat, and I think Jaden would get some of that. But if Jaden McDaniels goes from making, I think he makes less than Wendell more right now. I don't know. Like, so if he goes to making, $30 million a year, don't expect him to then be like giving you 18 and 10, because they don't really need 18 and 10. They just, they got a lot of other guys that can score and rebound, but they need him on the perimeter to guard the best player on the other team. There is, again, a viral clip of him and Ant basically taking Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving and putting them in prison last year. And when those two guys are locked in, I do struggle to find, Kawhi and Paul George still probably the best, but there's not many two-guard or two-man lineups that can just defend the perimeter. So the world is at that man's fingertips. He's about to get paid. I wonder, I don't know how much you follow this, but I think the deadline is the 23rd of October. I don't know if he'll get the deal done by then, which would then leak into restricted free agency next summer. But he has every negotiation aspect at his fingertips. He can basically demand the world, and the team's just trying to figure out, how do we just cut that to 90% because we can't afford to lose this player.
Yeah, and my question to you is going to be, do you think an extension gets done? And I guess the more pressing question is, what are the Wolves negotiating over right now? Because I understand if they were headed for cap flexibility, they want to preserve his small hold. They're not. They're going to run into, I know this is taboo on the Day More podcast at the moment, but they're going to run into second apron issues this next summer. So it's just if he gets on the open market, his teams are, and I've been pretty critical of this, I think they're cowards for not going harder after opposing restricted free agents. I don't care that you just tied up your cap space for 36 hours or whatever it is now, the new CBA. Make teams pay more to keep their own play. I love that gamesmanship. Jaden McDaniels is somebody that other teams, regardless of their timeline, will go and they will throw a max offer sheet to, barring anything catastrophic this season. So if you're the Wolves, if he's willing to sign the Devin Vassell deal, $135 million guaranteed with the potential $12 million in incentives or whatever it is, why are you not just inking him to that? I know Vassell's better on offense, but you just outlaid not just why Jaden McDaniels is better on defense than Devin Vassell, but why he is top 5. That's putting it probably being too conservative. And I'm saying is he is a top 5 perimeter defender, and he might just be the best perimeter defender. He can get into Herb and OG Anunoby and these other guys. He's up there and he's so important. It's what are they waiting for? What are they haggling over here?
I'll tell you this right now. This is pretty sourced. If they could put Devin Vassell's contract in front of Jaden and have him sign it, they would be over the moon. Okay. So I think that is the starting point when he and his representation walk into Tim Connolly's office. And again, if you're a Spurs fan and you want to get into the minutia of Jaden versus Devin Vassell, I totally get it. I just don't think you can compare them because they're getting asked to do different things. But I'm with you. To answer your question, we have 5 days. I don't think a deal will get done because I think both sides, the Wolves would say it's just so hard to figure out your value. You're probably maybe worth a max, but we would just love to have any sort of savings we can. You're right that the second apron's going to nuke them 5 different ways from Sunday, but if they can just find a little discount, right? Just some sort of discount, that's how you do inevitably go find a Shake Milton or a Troy Brown Jr. or a Nickeil. Every dollar matters, especially when you're financially in the situation the Wolves are. And for him, I think he's probably just okay, let's let's wait. I will say I am so with you. And when you said the restricted free agency stuff, I think of Austin Reeves. His situation was obviously a little different, but
No, shame on everybody. Shame
and
on
1,000%. But I do wonder if the Wolves look at Austin Reeves and think, well, if we get into restricted free agency and these teams have shown no backbone and just coming out on July 1st and saying, here's a max deal, maybe they're like, and to Tim Connolly's point, the one thing I'll say, and this ties everything in, he has never felt pressure to do something. He makes the Rudy Gobert trade, and everyone at that time last summer was like, well, you've got your 4 starters, Karl, Rudy, Ant, and Jaden. You got to give D'Lo the bag, lock him up, and put it all the pieces together. He's like, why would I have to do that now? He waited until, I think, the Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific time before the trade deadline, held the Lakers and Jazz kind of hostage, and made this move, gets Nickeil, gets draft picks, get Mike Conley. Same with Naz Reid. It's like, you got to re-sign Naz during the season. I think it was 36 hours before free agency started, he gets the deal done. So I think he might be comfortable letting this leak out as well. I don't think Jaden will be a problem. I don't think he's, for the football fans, I don't think he's going full TJ Hawkinson here with the Vikings saying my ear hurts, I can't play.
Right.
But it's the one domino, man, that I think about a lot, because without him, I don't think a lot of the other stuff really matters, and that's crazy for a guy that averages like 10-4.
Yeah, look, anything below the max, I would sign him to in a heartbeat. And if it's the max, I might understand them saying, well, then we're just going to wait to sign you. But I always worry when you're already tapped out, like the goodwill, just build it with the player who's this important. And I think, look, I don't want to get into whether Devin Vassell will be better long-term. I love Devin Vassell, another favorite of this podcast, but he has never shown what Jaden has on defense. And there have been flashes that Jaden has shown on offense that Devin Vassell has not shown the same level of like defensive lockdown flashes. And he also just doesn't have the physical tools that Jaden McDaniels does, just the sheer size. So if he costs more, yes, the scoring won't be there. The assist numbers won't even be there. Devin Vassell's getting a shit ton more ball screens thrown at him than Jaden McDaniels is. So if I were the Wolves, I wouldn't mess around with it, but it actually makes me uneasy that you think it won't get done. I know it's restricted free agency, they have all the control, but this just feels like one of those no-brainer situations. I mean, it's like what are you gonna near max him now or near max him later? What's the difference?
It does seem like a no-brainer. I have no additional smart analysis to put there, because the one thing that Wolves fans lean on if this experiment doesn't work, and yes, the draft capital and stuff, a smart team will still give you something for Karl, and a smart team will probably give you at least a little something for Rudy. But there's a chance. I mean, everyone loves the Tatum Brown stuff. It's like, oh, the best two-way, just build. Like, Ant and Jaden are 23 and 22. And usually the best players in the league aren't the best players in the league until 25, 26. Like, we could be 3 years away from that being the best duo in the league. You'll figure out everything else around it. But, yeah, this team cannot afford to lose Jaden McDaniels, and they've already shown how much they covet him by basically being like, we'll give up every legal first-round pick we can to make sure that we don't lose him.
You mentioned Nickeil Alexander-Walker before, and I'm asking this because it matters, but also because my co-host is obsessed with him. He was very impressive when he came over from the trade in Utah. I thought his defensive pressure was great for them. What is the key, though, to him kind of fitting in on offense? And I think you alluded to this, it seems like they might rely on him for a little bit more complicated offensive usage, just given their like lack of a discernible backup floor general structure. There you go.
The best thing I know we love stats. I know we love data and basketball reference on stuff. The best thing Nickeil Alexander-Walker has going for him is just up here. I think he gave the best quotes at Media Day. He is a 38-year-old in a 25 or 26-year-old's body. He has more than most. And again, think of all the guys we covered, man, or we've watched throughout the years that don't get it. I mean, Nickeil Alexander-Walker came in as a pretty high lottery pick, high prospect in New Orleans, and it just never worked. Ironically, that first year in New Orleans, one of his coaches, not his head coach, but one of his coaches was Chris Finch. Chris Finch was the guy pounding the table at the trade deadline to be like, don't just get Mike Conley, throw in. I think they were talking about like Rudy Gay or another player. Like, no, I want Nickeil. He obviously has a big summer with Team Canada, but he just sounds so mature, and he knows, like, I'm not going to be that guy. And I'm never going to be the guard that maybe you drafted 10th overall 5 years ago. I just want to be a contributor. I want to be another kind of Swiss Army knife type guy. So he's been great. They'll be able to play. I mean, in the 2 preseason games against Dallas, first night Ant didn't play because of an ankle. Second night Jane didn't play. Finch just plugged him in at both spots. So when Ant doesn't start, Nickeil starts. When Jane doesn't start, Nickeil starts. So he can give you a little of what Ant can give you offensively. He can give you a little bit what Jaden does defensively. But to me, as much as I rave about Naz Reid and Kyle Anderson and Shake Milton, if you were like, I don't think any Wolves player will win Sixth Man of the Year because they'll cannibalize themselves. But if you had to pick one, it would be Nickeil, because I think even though he won't start, Dan, at the end of the year, Nickeil will be top 5 in total minutes played on this team, because I just think he's going to be able to play next to Ant, play in place of Jaden. He does a lot. I mean, again, small sample sizes. The Nuggets killed everyone, but like he might have given Jamal Murray the toughest test in the playoffs when they played the play-in game against Shea in the Thunder. Obviously, they're related, but he also kind of did the best to shut down Shea. So he's kind of an untapped guy that we're all probably like, oh, I remember when he got drafted. He's a bust. He's 25. Like I think he's got a lot left in him, and he gets what his role is. And man, I don't know how much you believe in that stuff, but like hierarchy and just knowing your role to me is sometimes more important than just raw talent.
Yeah, I think it's like when you understand that you need to be more plug-and-play or scalable rather than, he had a ball a lot at some of his other stops.
Yep.
And I kind of enjoyed his on-ball stuff because it was so chaotic and unpredictable.
Right.
Like very rarely in a good way. So if he's willing to just make quicker decisions, which if you can absorb that from Mike Conley through osmosis, that would be great. Maybe hit some like relocation threes or something, like those set threes would be huge for him, and just attack an open space and maybe make quicker passes out of drives. Like there's just the outline based off what he's done defensively of like a really, really impactful NBA player that they just got on a freaking steal when you look at his deal. And so he's like feels like a sneaky swing piece from 10,000 feet away. If you ask, well, who aren't people talking about enough on this team? It's probably just like, well, Nickeil Alexander-Walker might just be like this really big swing piece, especially if you believe the bench is going to be even better than it was last season.
Yeah, again, he's a plug and play. I like the scalable. I'm going to steal that. Like, I just think he can do a lot of, it's kind of what you want in your bench sometimes, right? You just want guys that can come in and give you a little bit of a couple other guys that are, better at what they do, but they're sitting on the bench. Like if he can come in and hit a couple threes, his shot has been reformed as well. It does not look like the shot that you saw when he entered the league. And if he can at least be honest, I mean, he hit a couple threes during the play-in time and early against Denver that like helped them win games. I know they played all 5 games against the Nuggets, but like he hit a couple big shots. He is fearless. And I just think, again, to have a 26-year-old that's like already a vet or a mentor for the young guys. I know we might talk about a couple other young guys here too, but like it's just really important for this team because it's not just all 20-year-olds and old dudes like Rudy and Kyle. You got some mix in there of like, hey, I've been high drafted. I've had my lumps before, but this is kind of how you recover and fit a role, because that's kind of what these guys are doing, right? Like that's why some guys don't have jobs early in their careers, is they don't appreciate or understand the role. He knows what Finch has given him. They have a trust factor, and I think he's a big part of what they're trying to do this season.
This section might be more for me than anyone else because I know absolutely nothing about the players I'm about to ask you about. The extent of my knowledge, I wanted to ask you about just a couple of their young guys, your impressions of them, what their futures are with this team. The extent of my knowledge on Leonard Miller is you were on one of your podcasts saying that you are all in on Leonard Miller, basically. Can you give me the lowdown on Leonard Miller?
So I want to preface this by saying when you give up what you give up to get Rudy Gobert, you put yourself in a situation where the microscope is just like you have to hit the margins and the fringes. So when you don't have first round picks, like you got to hit those second rounders. Josh Minott was the first second round pick of the Tim Connelly era, just a 6'10". He looks just like when you watch this, like the animal videos of like a baby giraffe where not all their arms are connected to like the rest of their torso. He is that long and just, I mean, he's 20. So, but he's super athletic. He's so long. I don't know if he's like going to be a Jaden McDaniels or if he's going to be like a really light Karl-Anthony Towns. He can't really shoot, but he's just so athletic. And again, he's just not every young prospect that's 20 in the second round hits, but he just does a lot of stuff. And then in that same draft, they draft Walker Kessler. They send him out. Then they draft Wendell Moore Jr. out of Duke. He's 22 now. As high as I am on Josh Minott, who we've deemed the lawnmower because he just once he gets going, he doesn't stop. Wendell Moore, I don't know what he does. And I don't like to be super critical of players, but like you got to have one skill that you can tell the coach, like, I can give you that. I don't know what Wendell Moore's skill is. He's not big. He's not super athletic. He had 22 good minutes guarding Ja Morant in a spot start last year, but can't space the floor, doesn't get to the rim. So of those 3 young guys in the Timberwolves cupboard, he's the least likely to really do anything. And then Leonard Miller, 19-year-old kid, played for the G League Ignite last year. I saw him play when Wemby was over here and they were playing, Scoot Henderson in that Vegas showcase. He's just an amazing, for 19 years old, he's an elite rebounder. He got to play last night in some minutes. I think he had like 22 points, 15 rebounds. He just is a natural rebounder. He also just does a lot of, if you want to comp Dan, and I don't love comps, but I also kind of subconsciously love comps, he's got a lot of Lamar Odom in him. And yes, he's also left-handed, but Lamar wasn't the best shooter. He wasn't really the best at anything, but he just did a ton of stuff that, like, if anyone on this team had a chance to give you a 5x5 or a 5-and-5, like, box score with 5 steals, 5 blocks, it would be Leonard Miller because he's just kind of everywhere. He's learning how to play defense. But if you were investing in playing cards of any of those 3 guys, I'd buy a couple of Leonard Miller cards.
Wow. And is there even like a path? Like, what is the pathway that
Nope.
Yeah, there's just no path.
Nope, no path this year because I gave you 9. I told you how this team will be 9 deep, and no offense to Troy Brown Jr. from the Lakers, but like, I don't know how he plays. He would be 10th. They also, this is real basketball nerd stuff, but like Luka Garza is one of the best G League players of all time out of Iowa. He's 24 now. He might be like an NBA player. He's gotten really lean. So now you have another big man, another center. I think the Iowa Wolves could make the play-in tournament. Like, that's their G League team. Like, they just have so many guys that are going to be on this Iowa Wolves team, and it'll be led by Leonard Miller and Josh Minott. But if you're thinking long-term and you're like, what is this team going to do when they reach cap hell? Leonard Miller, Josh Minott, Luka Garza, all these kind of big, multi-talented, young, cheap players, that might be what the next iteration of this looks like, is when Ant and Jaden are making max money and they're the core of your team and you have one of Rudy and Karl, then you just plug in these weird, young animal power forwards that can do a lot of weird stuff and just give you energy. I mean, Josh Minott and Leonard Miller have a lot of Jared Vanderbilt in them, and the Wolves looked really good that one year when Jared Vanderbilt was playing a lot of 4, so that might be what they envision long-term. But short-term, if you're like, oh, I can't wait to watch these guys play and see if that kid knows what he's talking about, you'll never see him play. They'll never play this season, and it's not because they're bad. It's because I think the Wolves are also one of just the deeper teams in the league when you look 1 through 9, 1 through 10.
Is it like, can Josh Minott do anything that might just change that on the front? Does it come down to his shot? And also his name, I'm convinced, was like a character from Ravenclaw and Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Josh Minott just sounds like that for some
reason. Yeah, no. I think he can give you some time behind Jaden if you need to just kind of like be out there and be when I talk about the giraffe thing, like the way he navigates screens right now, he's not big enough or strong enough or has like the core strength to, like, he kind of gets bumped off, but then he just, because he's so long, he's got to be one of the longer players in the league, Dan. Like, he just recovers. It doesn't look like how you would teach it or coach it, but oh my God, he just recovered and he's back in the play. So I think they will definitely all be break glass in case of emergency. With Leonard Miller, I could see them being like, oh my God, we lost Karl again, and now Naz is out with the hamstring. We just need to rebound. Of all the young guys the Wolves have that won't play, Leonard Miller has one skill that tomorrow will translate. He'll go in there and just get you rebounds, and that's kind of like what Vando did too. So he can shoot better than Josh. He's got a lot of things to work on. Again, he's 19. Let's just close our eyes and see what he's like at 22. But in Tim Connolly's defense, after he made what a lot of people deem is one of the worst trades ever, he follows it up with the Nickeil Conley D'Lo trade, and then that's kind of what he did in Denver too, right? I mean, the best player in the league was a second-round pick. I don't think Josh or Leonard will be Nikola Jokic, but he was great at he loves to scout and he loves to find those hidden gems. And we're crossing our fingers in Minnesota that's what Leonard Miller and Josh Minott are.
I'm sold. Let's trade everybody and rebuild around.
Leonard Miller's fun, man. Leonard Miller is a good hang. Weird cat, just really into like anime, and I mean he's been in the league for 2 months and he gets rides from games with like Matt Ryan. Like, I don't know if he has a car yet. Matt Ryan, the basketball player, not the former quarterback. So, but good collection of guys, and I'm excited to see some of those young guys kind of develop.
We've reached the cookie cutter portion of the podcast. Are you ready to enter it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Are there any strengths, weaknesses, concerns, storylines about this team flying under the radar that we just haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, I mean, a weakness would be that the Minnesota Timberwolves, I mean, and they haven't ever like really been able to maintain success. Like, I don't know, I was looking this up the other day. I don't think they've had a 7-game or more win streak since like 2003. That seems impossible. They don't win 50 games a lot. They don't handle expectations a lot. They fought each other on national TV last year. But they also, and this would then be like a strength, but also maybe a weakness. They're under like a new ownership. It's been a weird one, right? Like when the Suns were under new ownership, it seemed like it happened overnight. The Wolves have been how when I was in college, I'd buy like Christmas gifts for my family. Like I would put money down in September and then make payments every month until I could go pick it up in December. They've been on a layaway plan. Mark Lowry, who most people don't know, but he's a rich dude. And then Alex Rodriguez, who I think a lot of people know. That's supposed to wrap up this December. It might leak into March, but the hope would be that they're majority owners by the end of this season. They have had a lot of influence on changes made. They went out and went, as they say, big game hunting to get a Tim Connolly. They also had a large influence on the Rudy Gobert trade, right? Like this asset we bought made the playoffs. Things are fun. Let's take it to the next level automatically. So they've done some good things. They've done some bad things. They've also done just a lot of good stuff behind the scenes that this team needed to become more modern and have more modern facilities and access to fans and all that stuff. But if the ownership thing for some reason falls through mid-season, I mean, the way we've described it a lot, Dan, is like everything is going really, really well. We're not really used to that. And like in Ricky Bobby, the movie, when they're at Applebee's and like the vibes are great, the family's having a dinner and the dad's like, you know what? I'm not used to good vibes. Like, let me mess this up. That's what I'm concerned about is like, who's going to mess up what is good vibes and a good roster and a good coaching staff? And it could be ownership, which depending on how you consume sports, like I think ownership is like an under talked about, but really important thing because they play a big impact. So if they can land the plane of A-Rod and Mark Lowry becoming the owners, the first thing that I think will translate is they'll get Kevin Garnett's jersey retired. The vibes will be immaculate. They'll have him back in the fold. That'll help with free agent signings and keeping guys around because you'll have the best player in franchise history in players' ears and around the facility. So that's for weirdos and nerds. But I mean,
that's big. That's not even something I just considered about. I'm sure it's been written about and I just missed it. But just like the fact that the ownership regime change would facilitate like Kevin Garnett just coming back.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about the Wolves, everyone knows that Kevin Garnett is the best player of all time and one of their only good players of all time. But yeah, he won't. He just won't. That jersey retirement won't happen. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's truly embarrassing as a Timberwolves fan that he had his jersey retired by the Celtics before the Wolves. And I know he won a title with the Celtics, but he will his shrine or whatever will have a Wolves jersey on. So, but it won't happen until their very old owner Glenn Taylor, who does get credit for keeping the team in Minnesota during some tumultuous times, but just is not forward thinking. He owns like newspaper companies and stuff. So he's more of an old school guy. They got to get him out. They got to get KG in. They got to land this plane. And then that'll just emphasize, I mean, whatever you think about Tim Connolly, he's beloved by the players. He's good with relationships. He's good negotiating with agents. So I like a lot of the stuff they've done, but if they can't make their final couple payments, it's, we're going to be at Applebee's and our dad's going to be making a scene. So it's going to suck.
So you had mentioned that it feels like there's 9 rotation spots locked, and that if we're going to go deep into the 10-man, I apparently when I was filling this out forgot Troy Brown Jr. existed. Maybe I'm still salty that Taurean Prince isn't here. But like, is there just, if you're trying to predict the top 10 most players who play on this team, like is it just it's Ant, Conley, Jaden McDaniels, Cat, Rudy, Naz, Kyle, Nah, Shake Milton, and Troy Brown Jr. Like, are those 10 spots just on lock?
Yeah, no notes. Like that's it. Like you did it better than I could. I think again back to that inflexible starting 5. Like I can't imagine they would ever. I mean, politically, or just imagine it on NBA Twitter if like there was an announcement that the Wolves were not going to be starting Karl-Anthony Towns anymore. Like that, they would get just crushed for that. So Mike, Ant, Jaden, Karl, and Rudy is going to be what they start as many games as possible. Obviously, Mike might only give you 60 games. I hope he only gives you 60 regular season games so you can kind of keep him fresh for the playoffs. Yeah. And then what I think, and again, I know I have a bias, but when you look at who their 4 kind of core bench pieces are, Shake Milton, Nickeil, Kyle, and Naz Reid, I think that's a really well-balanced amount of like some guys that can score, some guys that can defend, some guys that can play make, just some guys that are crazy like Naz Reid. So it's the best bench they've ever had, which obviously makes sense because I said they're super deep. But yeah, and then Troy Brown Jr., his shot has fallen in the preseason. So maybe he is another guy that you can throw him out there and just stretches the floor. I also think he could have nights where he just DNPs. So I think it's a firm 10, an even firmer 9. And then as I call like the third stringers, the Butler Brigade, those guys are rarely going to play. They're going to crush in Iowa, and then maybe during a weird week in February you'll pull one up. But yeah, I think it's easy to predict who the Wolves' rotation would be. It'll just come down to minutes and how they get allocated on a night-by-night basis.
You mentioned inflexibility when it comes to the starting five. Is there that same level of inflexibility when you're looking at what will be their most used crunch time unit, or could we see them maybe futz and fiddle depending on certain matchups?
I don't know, man. This pod's gone pretty well. I don't want to really think about that because that comes into like the politics of it. Is like, yeah, I keep coming back to like, what if every other 5-man lineup on this team is awesome, but the starters? I mean, the Wolves have been dealt with that before. It's like, are you able to close? You know, the politics thing of like not starting a guy is big and everyone will make fun of it online, but it'll also get made fun of if like for a whole week you don't close with Rudy. But like, will Finch be empowered enough? And it's a really, I think he has the most ingredients, but I think he's got one of the toughest kitchen jobs in the league of like, are you empowered enough to make those moves? He does control that locker room. The guys love him, but if you don't close with Karl for back-to-back games and you lose those games on buzzer beaters, like, is Karl going to be like, well, you know, what the hell, man? You should have closed with me. So I have a gun to my head. I know who they're starting. Gun to my head, I have no idea who they're going to close with because I think you can do so many different things. They always close with Kyle because he was so good in late game situations of just like getting you a good shot and not allowing Ant to like just go super ISO, which he's good at, but that's not how you want to win basketball games. And if you're going to close with Kyle, who are you not going to close with, right? Like maybe right. Mike. But I when they kick or tip off a week from now against the Toronto Raptors, who they close with against the Heat a couple nights later, like that would probably be the number one thing I cannot wait to see because you're not going to show those cards against Maccabi, you know, team from Israel last night or against the Mavs in Abu Dhabi, but you're going to show those cards the first night. So that is the number one burning question for me is how do they close, not how do they start?
Lighter fare. Is there a weirdo, unconventional, maybe they won't try it, they probably won't try it, but they should try it lineup you'd like to see them roll out?
Well, I mean, just like a weird, again, size matters. Like it would be cool to see a weird, they have so much length. It's not just size, like height, but like they could play Nickeil, Ant, Jaden, Josh Minott, Rudy. Like that team could maybe have an extremely awesome defensive rating and only be able to score because Ant hits 35 footers on offense. But I hope early on, as much as we think, or at least in the fan base, we think this team is built to win a lot of regular season games. It remains to be seen if they can handle the postseason pressure. But I hope that early on Finch is open to like trying different things and not emphasizing like we have to win that game on November 3rd. Like let's get weird, right? Like let's get weird for a little bit because I think the depth will really come into play after Christmas when, you know, this covering the league. There is a real, you know, inverse bell curve of when teams just kind of start to not care for a while because it's cold everywhere they go and they're tired. I think that team should use their depth to win those games and early on, like maybe give Leonard Miller a shot, right? Or just try these little things. But I really think that they have so many veterans and high-paid guys that you're just basically the Minnesota Timberwolves will basically have 9.5 players that you watch this year, and the rest of them you'll have to tune into the G League.
You convinced me to change mine by talking about Leonard Miller. And there's no way that they'd ever have almost $80 million worth of bigs on the bench. But give me Naz Reid, Leonard Miller, and Nickeil and Jaden McDaniels. Just give me that. I just want to see what happens, even just for a little bit. I would love to see it.
I'm totally with you. If anyone listening to me ramble about this team that has been a bottom dweller for 3 decades, if you take anything away from this, just watch Leonard Miller highlights. Weird dude, plays weird, but he might have a chance to just truly, I don't want to say this because I'm a fan, but I think he has a chance to kind of be special, but it might not be until 3 years from now.
As we record this, the Timberwolves are in the vaunted 44.5 win over-under club, which it feels like half the league is in. Would you take the over or the under on that?
I don't know how much of a March Madness fan you are, but like when it's early March and they're starting to build the bracket and they do like the blind resume thing, they just take the team names off and like this is what their resume is. You don't get to know who is who. If you took Timberwolves, which is a bad brand, off of this, I don't know how you would say under. I mean, they just have so much talent. Yes, they have some things to work on. They're like, well, I don't know if that's going to work. Yeah, man, I don't know if Chris Paul can start with that Warriors team. Like, there's a lot of, like, can the Lakers stay healthy? Do the Nuggets care? Or the Jazz? I heard the Jazz the other day have, like, they have a top 10 pick they got to kind of play around with. Like, are some of these teams going to cut bait early and try to tank or whatever? So I just think this team, with the expectations they have, with the depth they have, if nothing else, is going to win a lot of regular season games, and maybe they get embarrassed again in the playoffs. But I'm over. I know 44.5 represents more of like the West is weird from team 2 to team, I don't know, 13. But the one thing that's been cool, and again, not everyone's seen it because it was in Abu Dhabi and stuff, but they've really handled the preseason like adults. And I know that sounds funny because last year everyone was punching everyone and everything, but it's been a collective like mantra for them in like public statements and like media day and stuff, is like Kyle Anderson's been really out front about, I was immature last year and I want these guys to be more mature. So I understand the Timberwolves brand always lets you down. No one knows it better than me. They've been around as long as I have. But if you take that stink away, this roster, this coaching staff, this front office, they're going to get more than 44.5 wins.
I went over as well when we did our over-under podcast, and they actually might have been the easiest decision for me.
Oh, okay. I like that. I like that.
If 44.5 just feels way too low for this team, based off even the small data we have with their 5-man unit when Mike Conley's in there, I'm skeptical, but I'm mostly just sold. And you kind of touched upon this. The West is so wide open. We've talked about it so much on this pod. Which teams would you guarantee are actually better than the Timberwolves when the regular season is said and done?
That's a great question. Denver, because I just think I kind of like how they drafted older rookies and stuff that can plug and play. I think the Denver Nuggets with a healthier Jamal Murray and stuff, I do think they will win a lot of games. I'm not a Lakers guy, but that's, again, think of my biases. Half their roster is former Timberwolves players that used to be the Minneapolis Lakers. I prey on their demise, but I also know they're really good. So I think they have a high ceiling, but also a low floor, right? If AD drops or LeBron doesn't play a bunch of games. Outside of that, Dan, and I know I'm wearing a Wolves hat basically, I don't know who I would put gun to my head is guaranteed to be better, right? Like Golden State, the Clippers, the Mavs, the Kings. I see it from all those teams, and they have a better brand amongst casual NBA fans, but they also have a ton of holes. I mean, like the Kings, I loved watching them play last year, but no team has ever been that healthy, right? Like
don't say that to their fans. Did you know that they invented playing hurt? Did you know?
No,
you know
and I'm not here to pick fights with anyone. I'm just saying, like, every team has a floor that could have a trapdoor that could fall out, that it really goes bad for them, barring injuries. I mean, you saw it last year. We thought Carl tore his Achilles and the team made the playoffs. That's not what we're used to, and it was because of the depth. So other than maybe Ant getting hurt, which again, knock on wood, he's been really durable, I just don't see a trapdoor in their floor. So even if something goes a little awry or a rotation doesn't work or a guy gets hurt, they just have so many plug-and-play backup guys that I think this team will, again, win 45 or more games. I'm kind of hunting for like a top 4 seed in the West so they can – I cannot stress to you enough how not fun it is to have your favorite team tied to play-in tournaments every year. Like, not cool. Like, just get in and we'll be fine. But, yeah, I don't think outside of Denver and maybe the Lakers, I think every other team in the West has a bunch of question marks just as much as they have strengths.
I'm very surprised that you are way higher on the Lakers than I am. I only have
might be reverse jinxing it. Yeah.
I only have 2 top teams in the West, and there's but you're so right about every team has like these things that the floor can fall. Even Denver, they stretch 6 players deep, and like what if this is the year Nikola Jokic isn't as durable? But I have them there, and then I'm a big Phoenix guy. I think
that's fair. Okay.
But also Kevin Durant just doesn't play as much anymore. Bradley Beal's dealt with some injuries, but is that because he played for the Washington 35 wins or because he was actually hurt? Like, I don't know. My final question to you that I kind of just thought of is how committed are they to seeing this season through? Like, if they do start poorly or if this season goes off the rails, is there a chance? I'm not even saying it needs to be the bigs, but they are the ones under the microscope. Is there a chance there's a midseason shakeup, or is this more of a off-season recalibration situation if things do not go according to plan?
I think things would have to go so south that they make a move in season. I don't know. I have my own perspective on sometimes when I think a player like I don't think Rudy Gobert goes for what Rudy Gobert goes for in season. I do think when you cover the team or the league long enough and you get to know people, when you get into the off season, Dan, and like not a lot else is going on and these executives are bored, I think you can usually make bigger trades and recoup more value. So if you're trying to unload a Karl, I think he's probably more valuable in July than he is in February. But I don't think this goes back to, I know they paid a lot to get Rudy. I know they've invested a lot in Karl as the first overall pick. I don't think Tim Connelly is married to anything other than Anthony Edwards and then 1B, Jaden McDaniels. So I'd be shocked if a move was made in this season, even if things are a little wonky. But we are also just trying to embrace this roster and this franchise and have some fun, because that second apron stuff I don't really want to talk about right now because I'm more so in denial. Is next summer, like, this team is going to be up against, as many others will, a financial situation where it's like, you actually can't do this again. You can't run it back again. You have to trade someone. So I expect a big move in the next 12 months. I don't expect a big move in the next 4 months.
I'm with you. I just wondered if Karl-Anthony Towns' salary jumping by $13 million over the offseason.
That's fair too.
Would that make it? And then you're talking about the second apron, not just for the Wolves, but like the teams that are interested in Towns. Like, are they going to have the same concerns? So, Kyle, is there anything I didn't ask, or anyone I didn't ask you about over the last 75 minutes that you think we need to touch upon before I let you go?
No, like I told you before recording, I've never gotten an agenda before a podcast that was this thorough. So that's part of the reason why this podcast is so awesome. But no, I think, in general, if you want a good, I know Zach Lowe does his league pass rankings, and he did 11 through 30 the other day. The Wolves weren't on it. So
ooh, I didn't read it yet.
I do think the Timberwolves are a top 10 league pass team. If you're a basketball aficionado that just likes to tune in and watch some good games, we all are aware locally and nationally now and internationally about Anthony Edwards. I think he's must-watch TV. If he comes through your city, I think he's a guy that you want to go watch, because at any night he could give you 50. He could, completely posterize a guy. So it's really a fun time to be a Wolves fan. We have scar tissue that will never go away, but I think it's about as, again, I'm just knocking on anything that's a hard surface. It's about as positive and as optimistic as I think any fan, even cynics, have been on this franchise in a while. So it's exciting time.
You have killed the turns of phrase throughout this podcast. Very like Wilt dropping 100 stuff. Thank you so much for all your time. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah, I do a podcast a couple times a week. It's called Flagrant Howls. Dumb pun on Flagrant Fouls. Over at Score North, I am on Twitter at Kyle Teige, and then I help produce the Dane Morenbay podcast, which I think, like you said at the rip, is one of the better. He gets it. He's a beat reporter, but he just covers the team audio rather than with written word.
It is so good. The amount of times I cite that podcast on this podcast, it is just so, it is, what you guys do over there is spectacular. I know you said you expanded kind of the operations with producers and social guys, so that's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, but as you know better than anyone, like, we're trying to get into YouTube. I'm not an old person. I'm in my, young to mid 30s, but also, like, when someone's like, you should start a TikTok for Dane's pod, I was like, that sounds scary. So we're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. But yeah, we're a couple pods, we're just trying to cover the team from different angles. What I do with Dane is a lot more analytical. What I do over at Score North is just a lifestyle podcast. But yeah, the team has a small market and a small batch of people covering it, but Wolves Twitter is also a pretty friendly place. I know you know this, like, other fan bases might not be. I think Wolves Twitter is a pretty it might not be like the Hawaii, but it's a comfortable spot for you to come visit if you want to just hang out one night. A lot of cool creative content people and stuff. So come visit. Might not be your first destination, but it's a good spot. Just like the Wolves, they might not be the best team, but I think they could be a pretty solid place for you to hang out these next 6 or 7 months.
I will include the links to both of Kyle's podcasts in the YouTube and podcast description, so go subscribe and show your support. Kyle, you gave me 80 minutes, basically. I very much appreciate your time, and rest assured I'll be spamming your DMs again in the future.
Appreciate you. Everyone should subscribe to this pod because we get a lot from Dan's pod as well. So, Dan, you're a legend, and we'll talk again soon.